Hello learners, Dr. Paul here with a video summary for Unit 3. And in this unit, one of the things we talked about was self-identity, and you had an opportunity to explore your own culture and ethnicity and your background in that respect. And a couple of things about self-identity. So there's a tendency to believe that if we have clients that have a similar cultural background or similar ethnic background or geographical background, that it's easier to connect with those clients. And on a very basic level, that's true because there's a certain familiarity with the norms and the beliefs. But at the same time, it's been my experience that the more familiar I am to a client, the less curiosity I have. And as you will hear more and more in your courses, curiosity is a therapist's best friend, and we get stuck with our cases when our curiosity shuts down. So I'm thinking of a case where a couple came in, and the husband was from a town about a mile from where I grew up, and we had a similar ethnic background and similar high school experiences, childhood experiences, and there was just immediately a familiarity about him, although I didn't know him. And as much as there was a connection because of that, I did find myself feeling sort of shut down and not as curious as I normally would be. Contrast that with somebody who comes from a completely different culture, of which practicing in South Florida, that happens all the time. My curiosity is wide awake. And if they're from a different country or a different religion, for example, then I have lots to be curious about. And again, you'll see more and more why curiosity is a therapist's best friend. The other issue about self-identity that I wanted to touch on is there are some programs and some people in the mental health field that believe it's extremely important that as therapists we get our own therapy. And to the degree that as people we want and desire therapy, that's one thing. But these people believe that in order to understand yourself more and your triggers and your hot points, so to speak, that getting your own therapy is important. The other path in this discussion, and the one that I subscribe to, is that it's not necessarily urgent or mandated that therapists get their own therapy. Again, if you're experiencing challenging life situations or you want personal growth, there's nothing wrong with going to therapy. But the mandate that therapists go to therapy, I think, is another story. And I think it flows from the epistemology that clients are pathological, and so therapists in some ways are pathological, and we have these blind spots, and we have these areas that we need to work through, and we don't want to get our buttons pushed. We have to remember that first and foremost, we're human in therapy. And it's okay to have emotions about clients and to have feelings about clients. And we certainly want to be aware of those when they come up, and we certainly want to process them with colleagues and supervisors. But I don't necessarily view therapists as pathological like that other perspective would say that they are. So just some thoughts about that. The other part of this unit was about the role of the therapist, and this is a crucial point, because as we are seeing, different models of therapy look at the role of the therapist very differently. And it's interesting to kind of think about your own perceptions of what the role of the therapist is. Many of us view the role of the therapist like from a medical model perspective, that we're an expert. And we are an expert in mental health, family dynamics, personality, you name it. And it can be hard to shake that for ourselves. Because most approaches to therapy, non-systemic, so individual pathology-oriented approaches, so I would consider cognitive behavioral therapy, dialectical behavior therapy, certainly psychoanalytic therapy, most cognitive therapies, those are individual-oriented therapies. And typically from those perspectives, the therapist is an expert with expert information, and it's a very medical model mentality. With the infusion of postmodern ideas into the therapy world and into family therapy in particular, the role of the therapist has been questioned, and to some degree the early pioneers of family therapy questioned the expert role as well. So now we have other constructions of the role of the therapist, and I've listed a few here: coach, teacher, mediator, collaborator, co-constructor of reality. So it's important for each of us to think about what is our role, and do we see ourselves as experts with expert knowledge? And to some degree, when you're a coach or a teacher or even a mediator, you are an expert and you're providing that sort of expertise. From my perspective, being very influenced by postmodern ideas and the ideas that underlie narrative, collaborative, and solution-focused therapies, the role of the therapist is somebody who collaborates. So we're not necessarily higher up or have more expertise. In fact, we privilege the client's worldview and the client's belief system, and we're also looking for client expertise at every turn in the therapy process. So this sort of flips the role of the therapist on its head, where we present oftentimes with what Harlene Anderson calls a not knowing perspective. Well, if you're an expert, you're supposed to know. She talks about the not knowing perspective being a very advantageous position as a therapist, because when we don't know, we leave room for a client's resources, strengths, and abilities to emerge in the therapy process. So again, I think it's important. It's not necessarily there's a right or a wrong way to view the role of the therapist, but be mindful that there are different conceptions of the role of the therapist, and how we view ourselves and our role greatly shapes the course of therapy. And for many therapists, giving up the expert role is a very challenging thing to do. We want to feel empowered. We want to feel like we know a lot. When actually being a good therapist is really about shedding. It's about shedding certain belief systems about clients. It's about shedding certain belief systems about the role of the therapist, and being able to have a human-to-human connection with your clients in a way that frees them up to see other possibilities and other ways that they can relate to their life situation. So a very important idea, this role of the therapist, and I would encourage you as we go on in the course to keep this in mind as we evaluate different models of therapy and see what fits most for you. Okay, great. So just reply to this posting that you were able to view the video, and also include one thing that was sparked in you, or possibly another follow-up question that you might have for me. Okay, see you soon.